Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It's great to be with you again this week as we turn our attention to Isaiah 7, talking about Damascus, Syria, and Ephraim, Israel. Last week we talked about the oracles against the two southern nations, the nations south of Israel, Philistia and Moab. This week Isaiah turns his attention to these two nations to the north of Israel. And the main point again being, depending on anyone or anything other than God is just foolishness. So why both Syria and Israel? Why both Damascus and Ephraim? Well, they're linked. Now, they have forged an alliance against Assyria and against Judah. And so now Isaiah talks about them together because, again, as we saw earlier in Isaiah, the people of Israel, people of Judah would try to forge relationships with these other nations when they felt the threat, rather than count on God, even though God had proven himself over and over again. And so today it's the same situation. And not only have they aligned themselves against a foreign nation, they've aligned themselves against their own brothers, right? The southern nation of Judah. And so in the first two verses, Isaiah addresses Damascus, and he says, "An oracle concerning Damascus, behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. The cities of Aroer are deserted. They will be for flocks, which will lie down, and none will make them afraid." Now, again, we're not going to read all of 17 in today. As we talked about last week, we're kind of consolidating a little bit because the message is basically the same, how God is dealing with these nations who disobey him. So Isaiah warns that Damascus, right, Syria, would be taken by the enemy. And indeed, this prophecy is fulfilled in 732 BC when the Assyrians conquer it. And so their alliance with Israel was of no use. They could not stand up to the power and the might that was Assyria back in the day. And in the following verses now, after addressing Damascus, Isaiah turns his attention to Israel. And this warning to Damascus and the destruction of Damascus serves as a warning to Israel about the judgment that's coming upon them. And he uses several images to describe the collapse that is coming. He talks about the wasting away of a sick person in verse 4. In verses 5 through 6, he talks about gleaning a small harvest. Anybody who's ever had a vegetable garden knows that there are some years where things just don't grow. Talking to a friend of mine this past week, they have an apple tree, had an abundance of apples last year. They've got one so far this year. One. Just happens. Talks about deserted gardens becoming a wasteland. Everybody knows that if you do not tend to your garden, the weeds take over, and they take over rather quickly. Talks about the overflowing of a flood. We've experienced that here in the last 12 years. We know what that's like here in Colorado. And the blowing away of chaff in a windstorm. If you've ever driven here in Colorado, if you've ever gone west towards Nebraska, towards Kansas, there is just vast areas of nothing. And the wind can blow, and you see these tumbleweeds blowing all the time, and stuff is flying all over the place. Those are the pictures that Isaiah uses to describe the devastation that's coming upon Ephraim, upon Israel. And the other side of that coin for Isaiah is that, he sees that the coming destruction will be enough for people to realize that they can't rely on their own strength, and they will turn back to God. Their idols will not save them. They will come to a realization that God is the only way. If you turn to Proverbs 1, we're going to read a lot of this in because it speaks to this. Proverbs 1, beginning at verse 20. He says, "Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? If you turn away at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. Then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease, without dread of disaster. This suits Israel perfectly, because this is exactly what's happening to them. The nation is sick with sin, but they are beyond recovery. They will turn to God. They will turn back to God once the storms come and the water starts to rise, and they will turn back to God, but it's going to be too late. And in 722 BC, the northern kingdom would fall to the Assyrians. So because they had spurned God for so long, ignored his calls, ignored his pleadings, his prophets, his word, right? God will allow them to fall to Assyria. And the simple explanation, I guess, for lack of a better term, is that Israel just forgot God. God constantly performed, you see this all throughout their history. God has constantly performed miraculous works in their midst for them to see. And it wouldn't take long for them to turn away. It wouldn't take long for them to forget what he had done for them in the past. And so she would turn to herself to supply her needs. But all those attempts would fail. And it's a recurring theme today. I was thinking about this as I was preparing today's message. We're in the same boat, right? All the nations of the world, we all think we have it sorted out. But human achievements, even though they seem great at the time, they seem promising, in the end, they amount to nothing. And the proof is in the fact that it didn't prevent 2 world wars, human achievement, didn't prevent a nuclear arms race, didn't prevent the war in Korea, didn't prevent the war in Vietnam, doesn't prevent the constant upheaval in the Middle East. No matter how hard we try at our own devices, matters not. We continually fail. Without God, our achievements will fail every time. Right? Just look at the constant examples of man's inhumanity to man. Didn't even get to all that stuff that we talked about before. Right? Man's inhumanity to man trumps human achievement every time. Every time. I talked about Linda being in Israel on October 7th. I mean, she was a witness to rockets coming from Gaza and the Iron Dome doing its thing, and she saw that firsthand. So as many people that have tried to bring peace to that region, just take that region by itself, it's failed. It's failed. And because the people trying to do it may have God in their minds and in their hearts, but the people who are involved in making war on one another all the time probably don't. And until God is at the root of all those actions and all those efforts, they're going to be for naught. So Israel forgot God who brought her out of captivity from Egypt. She forgot that he is sovereign over all the nations. A lot of the commentaries control. He controls the armies. I don't like that term. He's sovereign over all of them, and he will use them to his purposes, as we talked about last week, as he sees fit. But he warned Israel what would happen to her if she were to go her own way. And I shudder at the thought of the judgment God is going to bring upon the nations of today, because we have certainly gone our own way. I mean, even our churches suffer from self-inflicted wounds. Right? Churches, I've been seeing just unbelievable things on social media, advertised by churches and said by pastors in these churches, that Jesus was gay, that same-sex marriage is fine, performing same-sex marriages in their church, preaching false prosperity gospels, condoning abortion, flying rainbow flags, right? A symbol of God's covenant that's been used in a perverted way, and flying those flags in their churches. Having trans story hour for kids in their sanctuaries, right? Fleecing the sheep instead of shepherding the sheep. Those are all hot button subjects, but they need to be dealt with and they need to be faced, because they are false teachings, every one of those things. So how is God going to deal with us as a society as we've turned our back on him and on his ways and on his word? Right? What do we think awaits the nations that turn themselves over to false religions, false gods? Even today, false gods. Right? God is our maker. He is the Holy One of Israel. He is the God of our salvation, and he is our rock. We've seen the results of this foolishness. Israel trying to rely on idols and false gods and other nations to help her and to save her, instead of trusting and obeying the God who cares for her, who's got a covenant with her, who brought her out of captivity, the one true God of the universe. But yet, we follow eyes wide open in the same footsteps, doing the same things, making the same mistakes, falling into the same traps that Israel fell into. Right? We trust the gods we've made. Right? Gods of pleasure, gods of wealth, military might, human achievement, religious experiences, quote unquote. That's what we trust in. Trust in politicians. Trust in news media people. Trust in people on social media. Trust in celebrities. Those are our gods now. Where's it leading us? Again, we have to make that choice. Who are we going to be ruled by? We have to choose to be ruled by God, not our own devices. And God needs to be the one who counsels us. He needs to be the one that we seek out every day to guide us as a people, as a family, as a church, as a nation. Right? Not social media people, not people who profess to know. People who pass themselves off as one thing or another when that's not really who they are. They know nothing when it comes to the knowledge of God. Right? You can tell by the fruit that they bear. So the only safe haven is taking refuge in God, our salvation and our rock. Because as Solomon said, everything else is just vanity.